Hey guys, tonight we are heading somewhere unexpected high into the mountains of South America, where an ancient message system once ran faster than any horseback courier, but without a single letter written down. Imagine hiking alone through the Andes, your boots crunching against a stone path carved centuries ago. The air is thinner, the winds sharper, and every so often you pass a strange mossy stone hut by the side of the trail. You'd think it's just old debris, but it's actually a piece of one of the most sophisticated communication networks the world almost forgot. Welcome to the Inca Empire's postal system. Now, to be clear, if you were actually a part of this system, you'd likely be a Chasquis, a royal runner who was expected to sprint at high altitude for miles at a time, carrying nothing but some carefully knotted string and the weight of empire on your back. No pressure, right? And yes, if you stopped to admire the alpacas too long, there were consequences. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone is drifting off from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself stepping onto a mountain path so old and well-worn, it feels like a memory. There's no signpost here, just flattened stones set deep into the earth, hugging the slopes with almost unnatural precision. These roads don't curve lazily. No, they commit. They go straight up. This was how the Inca moved across their enormous empire, one message at a time. The air is thin enough to make you pause. Even standing still, your lungs work overtime, but that never stopped the Chasquis. These were young men, typically in their teens or early 20s, chosen for their speed endurance and borderline terrifying lung capacity. Picture the cross-country track team you never joined, but way more ripped and way more likely to sprint past a puma. Historians still argue whether the Chasquis were volunteers, honored picks, or something more like state-mandated messengers, but everyone agrees they were vital. Without them, the Inca's enormous non-literate society would have buckled under its own weight. And no, you weren't carrying a letter or scroll or engraved tablet. Instead, your message might be a bundle of colored cords called quipus, carefully knotted in patterns that could represent anything from tax collection tallies to how many potatoes someone owed. In essence, you were the envelope, the courier, and the operating system all in one. Imagine running along a trail that dips sharply down into a valley, then zigzags back up into a cold cloud. You carry the message for a couple of miles, but you're not alone. Hidden just ahead is a small stone building, a tambo. This is your relay point. You spot another Chasquis waiting just outside, poised like a sprinter at the Olympics. As you close in, you don't even break stride. You pass the message, a knotted quipus cord, maybe a tokens, or even a verbal memorization, and the next runner takes off immediately. It's like the slowest but highest stakes game of tag you've ever seen. And these relay posts, they were spaced like a heartbeat every few kilometers along the royal road. Even the emperor himself relied on this system. News from the edges of the empire could make it to Cusco, the capital, within days. That's faster than some of our modern postal deliveries, and without the help of a single delivery truck or tracking number. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Some Chasquis were trained to carry spoken messages, not just quipus cords. They'd memorize speeches or announcements and relay them word for word. Oral tick-tock, but in sandals. Of course, historians still argue whether any kind of standardized script existed alongside quipus, maybe a system of gestures or sounds we haven't fully deciphered yet. But whether your mission involved math chords or royal commands, the pressure was on. The Inca didn't play around with logistics. You didn't get lost. You didn't rest too long. And if you dropped the message or got eaten by a jaguar, well, that's not ideal for performance reviews. Even your diet was optimized. Chasquis consumed high-energy foods like chuño freeze-dried potatoes and coca leaves to boost endurance. No Gatorade, but apparently just enough altitude snacks to keep going. Imagine now that you're resting near a tambo. You hear the shuffle of another runner's sandals in the distance. There's a rhythm to it, steady and urgent. The road hums with memory like it remembers the thousands of messages it once carried across time and terrain. You stare at a worn stone carved into the wall. It might have once held supplies or perhaps a small fire. A clay jug nearby could have contained water or chicha, a fermented drink made from corn. The walls are thick, the door frame small, built to shelter, not impress. Practicality was the aesthetic of empire. And still there's something poetic about it. This whole network, silent, precise, efficient, was like an empire's heartbeat. You're standing inside the veins. All of this, the runners, the tambos, the knotted cords, served an empire that stretched nearly 200 to 500 miles down the spine of South America. That's about the distance from New York to Las Vegas, without wheels, without horses, and definitely without express shipping. So next time your email takes 3 minutes to send, just remember, someone once ran up a mountain barefoot to deliver a string. You begin to descend a steep mountain path. Now the sun low on the horizon, painting the stone road in long golden streaks. Somewhere far off, a condor drifts lazily across the sky as if overseeing the vast network below. Your feet follow the same stones worn down by thousands of messengers before you. It's easy to forget just how enormous the Inca Empire truly was, stretching from modern-day Colombia down to Chile and Argentina, winding through nearly every possible climate zone. To connect all of it, the Inca built what's known as the Capac-an, or the Great Inca Road, over 25,000 miles of it. And here's the catch, not a single wheel turned on these roads. No wagons, no carriages, just feet, human and llama. But you're only concerned with one thing, getting the message through. What's most remarkable is how engineered this whole thing was. The Inca weren't just trailblazers. They were infrastructure nerds. The roads had drainage ditches, suspension bridges made of woven grass, and retaining walls carved to resist earthquakes. Yeah, those ancient stone paths probably handle seismic activity better than your city sidewalk. Let that sink in next time you trip on a loose paving stone. And along the route, there's always a tambo, a way station for you and your fellow Chasquis. Think of it as an ancient Amazon warehouse, but without the air conditioning. Some were tiny, used only for quick baton passes between runners. Others were sprawling complexes stocked with food, blankets, weapons, and spare sandals. Yes, spare sandals. Running shoes, 15th century style. Inside one tambo you find shelves lined with clay pots, each containing something essential: dried meat, cornmeal, herbs, maybe a sloshing jug of chicha. There are fire pits dug directly into the stone floor, designed to keep the inside warm at night without filling the room with smoke. Everything is built with function in mind: stone benches to rest on, narrow alcoves to store gear, and thick walls to block the wind howling down from the Andes. Historians still argue whether tambos were staffed by permanent caretakers or operated more like hostels where travelers helped themselves. But there's evidence some were guarded by meta laborers, citizen workers conscripted to serve the state. Sort of like a rotating volunteer fire department, but with way more llamas and way less chili. Speaking of llamas, don't get too excited. They weren't exactly your friendly trail companions. Sure, they could carry loads of up to 70 pounds, but they were stubborn spat when annoyed and flatly refused to move if the incline wasn't to their liking. Ancient pack animal meets furry diva. Still, the llamas were crucial. The Inca didn't have oxen, horses, or carts. Llamas were the U-Hauls of the Andes. Behind you, a small caravan trots along the path led by a soft-spoken herder, chewing coca leaves and muttering to his animals in Quechua. He nods politely as he passes his eyes, scanning the horizon for the next curve in the trail. The road narrows here, hugging the cliffside like a ribbon. One slip would send you tumbling into a valley so deep it feels like a metaphor. But the Chasquis knew these paths well. They ran by moonlight fog, even snow guided by memory instinct, and maybe a few whispered prayers to Inti, the sun god. A fringe theory still hotly debated suggests some of the messengers may have used whistles or horns to signal their approach, like ancient Doppler effects, echoing through the mountains. Whether that's true or just a romantic embellishment is up for debate. But the idea of ghostly sounds sweeping through the misty valleys adds a cinematic flair, doesn't it? You reach a narrow bridge strung between two rock faces. It sways gently in the wind. This is one of the famous Inca rope bridges woven entirely from grass, called quipus. These bridges were engineering marvels rebuilt annually by local communities in a tradition that survives even today. Walking across one is like stepping onto a giant hammock that forgot it wasn't a sidewalk. Crossing slowly, you grip the sides instinctively, even though the ropes hold firm. Below, a river thunders past, uncaring of history. On the other side, the path rises again. You sigh. Of course it does. You trudge upward, your legs aching slightly now. You imagine what it must have been like to be a Chasquis sprinting this path, in half the time lungs burning, brain racing to remember some nobleman's speech word for word. They were the text messages of their day, short, precise, and impossible to unsend once spoken. And the roads weren't just for mail. Armies marched here, merchants traded goods, villagers visited distant relatives. The empire ran on foot. The Kafakkan wasn't just a postal system, it was the empire's nervous system, relaying signals from the outer limbs back to the imperial brain in Cusco. At a small overlook you pause. The mountains spread before you like waves, frozen mid-crash. Somewhere out there, another Chasquis is running toward you. His message is vital, or maybe mundane, but the network ensures it moves. That's the point. In the world of the Inca, nothing stood still. You chew a leaf of coca, feel the slow tingle behind your gums, and start walking again. There are messages to carry, even if they're only dreams. You wake with the sky just turning that soft gray blue of pre-dawn, the kind of quiet light that makes even the rugged stones of the Andes seem gentle. A cool mist curls around your ankles as you stir the ashes of last night's fire with a stick, nudging a few orange embers back to life. It's time to go again. The relay never stops, not for sunrise, not for aching calves, and certainly not for sleep. Today, you're thinking about your role more deeply. You're not just walking, you're carrying something invisible but important. And that leads us to the people behind this entire operation, the Chasquis. The Chasquis were the elite messengers of the Inca Empire. Not just anyone could grab a bag and start running. You had to train from childhood. Think of it like Olympic-level postal service. Boys from strong Andean communities were raised at high altitudes, conditioned to race over mountains, memorize complex verbal messages, and sprint across dizzying terrain. They didn't just carry objects, they carried the empire's heartbeat. Historians agree the Chasquis system was incredibly efficient. A message could travel over 150 miles in a single day, thanks to a well-orchestrated network of runners stationed every 1.5 to 2 miles. That's right, kind of like human Wi-Fi repeaters stationed along the route, except wearing sandals made from woven reeds and not blinking every time your connection drops. You reach another relay point now, a small tambo with a thatched roof and wide steps carved directly into the rock. A Chasquis waits here, breathless and eager, pacing like he's been holding in a sneeze for an hour. He's ready to hear your message and run it further down the trail, but not just hear it, remember it. See, the Inca didn't use a written alphabet, no scribbled scrolls or ink-stained parchments. Everything was communicated by speech gesture or with quipus, those mysterious knotted chords that still baffle researchers today. You and the next runner exchange a quick nod. Then you recite your message aloud. It's short but urgent news of a landslide along the southern route. Your words are rhythmic, designed to be memorized, almost like a chant. The young Chasquis repeats it back word for word. Perfect. Without another word, he bolts down the trail, sandals slapping against the stone. The beauty of this system was redundancy through rhythm. The Incas knew that memory worked better when things were poetic or musical, so messages were shaped to flow just like those early commercial jingles that somehow still live rent-free in your brain decades later. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, except now its two llamas blocked the southern pass. And let's talk about the quipu. The quipu was a tool for recording information made of strings with knots tied at precise intervals. A master Chasquis, or sometimes a trained quipukumayok, literally a keeper of the knots, could read these strings by touch. Quipus could track census data taxes, calendar dates, and probably more. Scholars still argue whether quipus were purely numerical or if they contained abstract language. It's like trying to decode someone's Excel spreadsheet without knowing what columns mean, and the spreadsheet is made of alpaca hair. Some fringe theories suggest there was even a poetic form of quipu-coded storytelling woven into the knots and colors. But so far, no Rosetta Stone has turned up. So if someone buried an Incan Spotify playlist out there, we haven't found it yet. Still, the fact that a government ran so efficiently without written language, that's not just impressive, it's humbling. Messages flew up and down the Andes on the legs and lungs of runners and on cords braided with memory. Compared to that, waiting 2 days for a lost package suddenly feels a little less dramatic. As the sun rises higher, you pass a Chasquis training ground tucked into a sunny hillside. A few teenagers, sweaty and determined, dash between stone markers, panting. In the thin air, an older runner watches from a carved stone bench, correcting posture, barking encouragement, occasionally sipping something from a gourd. You remember training like that, legs, trembling lungs on fire, but proud to belong to something so ancient and alive. The Inca state didn't treat this role casually. Chasquis were granted certain privileges, better food, light ceremonial garments, sometimes even special honors in festivals. You were a living artery of the empire. If a noble needed to deliver news, summon aid, request grain, or simply show off, you were the one who made it happen. Historians still debate how much personal interpretation a Chasquis was allowed. Were you just a vessel for information, or did your tone, emphasis, and presence subtly shape the meaning of what you carried? It's a bit like asking how much a stage actor can add to Shakespeare. Maybe the runner's delivery mattered more than we think. Now, on this trail above a river gorge, you pass an older man weaving a new pair of sandals by the roadside. He smiles with a tooth missing and offers you a piece of dried chuño, freeze-dried potato, light as air but filling. You chew slowly, savoring the earthy taste. He asks where the message is going. You tell him the capital, Cusco. He nods knowingly, like he's heard that answer 1,000 times. The capital always calls. That's where the Sapa Inca, the emperor, waits. The child of the sun, the golden one. But that's for another section. For now, you wipe sweat from your brow, shoulders rising and falling with steady breath. Another message has gone forward. The next one waits, and so do your feet. By midday, the sun sits high and unrelenting above the Andean ridgeline, casting crisp shadows across every stone and slope. Your path bends into a dizzying ascent, zigzagging upward past tufts of ichu grass and startled alpacas who glare at you like you've interrupted their existential pondering. You press on breath-shallow legs, moving on sheer habit now. This climb is no joke even for a Chasquis like you. You're approaching one of the more famous stretches of the Royal Road, part of the vast Kapak Aan, or Noble Path. this wasn't just a dirt trail through the mountains. Oh no, it was a 24,000-mile-long web of finely engineered highways, some carved right into cliffsides, others stretching across deserts, jungles, and snowfields, binding the empire together tighter than a basket of coca leaves. And here's the kicker. This wasn't just for foot traffic. Llamas served as pack animals, though not exactly racing material. They're more likely to lie down dramatically than hustle up a mountain. So if you've ever wished for a llama taxi, you should probably lower your expectations. This network was for runners, administrators, and imperial communication, all carefully choreographed. You pass a stretch of finely cut paving stones, some fitted so perfectly you couldn't slide a reed between them. Historians still argue whether this craftsmanship was more about durability or spiritual geometry, because yes, even rocks had cosmic significance in Inca worldview. The land wasn't just terrain, it was alive. Mountains were quipus, sacred beings. Rivers were veins. Even the road beneath your feet had spiritual weight. Occasionally you come across way stations called tambos, small rest stops for Chasquis and officials. Some were simple huts, others had storage pits full of dried corn, jerky, and ceremonial beer called chicha. You always knew which ones had the good chicha word, traveled faster than the messages did. You duck into one such tambo, now grateful for the shade and cool stone walls. There's a small clay jug of water set out, and someone's left a stack of coca leaves and lime paste in a woven pouch. You pop a few leaves into your mouth, tuck a wad in your cheek, and let the numbness crawl across your gums. It's like nature's version of a triple espresso, minus the anxiety and bathroom breaks. Back on the road, you spot a faint carving in the stone, worn but still legible. It's a sunburst with a pair of feet beneath it. That's not graffiti. It's a signal. Chasquis have passed here before, and the sun god Inti watches over travelers. You mutter a quiet thanks, just in case. There's something oddly comforting about this road. It's lonely, yes, but not isolated. You're part of a system, a lineage, a pulse. Every time your sandal touches stone, you're stepping where thousands have stepped before messengers like you, carrying quipus words or sacred bundles called quipu. You are the bloodstream of an empire whose heart beats in the city of Cusco. You pass another traveler, now a state herder, with 24 llamas and an expression that says, "I regret my career choices." He nods solemnly, and you return the gesture. No words exchanged, none needed. You're both part of this road's rhythm. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some sections of the Inca road were so well built that Spanish conquistadors later used them for their own horses and wagons. That's right, the invaders showed up with metal armor and firearms and still thought, wow, nice roads. That's how good they were. But not everything is grandeur and gold. You round a bend and find a collapsed bridge, well more like the remains of one. Just a few tufts of frayed rope swinging gently in the breeze. A classic Huachaca rope bridge made of braided grass and wild engineering hope. These bridges had to be rebuilt regularly, sometimes by entire communities, in elaborate ceremonies involving chanting, dancing, and a lot of nervous laughter. Historians still debate whether these bridge-building rituals were more about infrastructure or community bonding. Probably both. Either way, it beats waiting for your city to fix potholes. You take a moment to survey the ravine. It's deep, with a river snaking far below, sun flashing off its surface like a blade. You backtrack a few steps, head uphill, and find a detour path etched into the slope. It'll add an hour to your journey, but that's part of being a Chasquis. You don't just run, you adapt. As the altitude increases, the air gets thinner. Every breath feels like sipping through a straw, and your legs feel like they're filled with rocks. You think about turning back, but then remember that this message is headed to the Highland Administrative Center at Vilcachhuaman. It's urgent, something about a maize tax shortage, or maybe a dispute over ceremonial cloaks. Either way, someone very important will be very annoyed if they don't get the news. So you trudge on. You reach a pass lined with low stone walls and small shrines made from stacked rocks, called apachitas. Travelers leave offerings here, bits of cloth, coca leaves, even old sandals. You add a leaf to the pile and whisper a quick plea for strength. The wind answers with a gentle rush past your ears, like a sigh from the mountains themselves. It's quiet again. Just you, the road, and the soft sound of your own heartbeat echoing in your ears. You glance at the horizon where distant peaks blur into mist. Somewhere down that slope another tambo waits. Another Chasquis prepares to run. Another thread in the web gets tugged. The message moves forward. And so do you. You blink against the highland glare as you trudge across a narrow stone bridge spanning a gurgling stream. The wind carries thin wisps of cloud across the sharp edges of the mountains, and somewhere above you a condor wheels in lazy spirals. Beneath your sandals, ancient paths bear the polished sheen of countless feet. Here lies the backbone of the empire's movement, the Kapaknan, or the Great Inca Road. Built across impossible terrain, the Kapaknan stretched over 24,000 miles, connecting the empire from Ecuador to Chile. It's not just a road, it's the circulatory system of the Inca world, and the Chasquis, those nimble messengers we talked about, are its lifeblood. You pass mossy milestones and weathered way stations, imagining the thousands of sandaled feet that once sprinted this same route. Spoiler, most of them were a lot faster than you. The roads themselves weren't all the same. In the highlands, you walk on stone-paved tracks, while in lower elevations or the rainforest, the roads were often beaten earth or even suspended over rivers with rope bridges made of woven grass. One wrong step and well, let's just say no one's catching your mail today. You arrive at a tampu, a modest structure with low stone walls and a thatched roof. These roadside lodges provided rest and supplies to Chasquis and officials. They're spaced roughly every 10 to 15 miles, about a half-day's run. Inside there's a fire pit, still warm, a few clay pots, and a hammock-looking contraption made of alpaca wool rope. You resist the urge to collapse in it, but the smoke-smudged ceiling and faint whiff of dried maize are oddly comforting. Historians still argue whether these tampu were available to the common traveler or strictly reserved for messengers and government officials. Most agree, however, that the entire road system was primarily about control, military, political, and logistical. After all, if you're going to rule the Andes, you'd better be able to move information and troops quickly. As you walk on the landscape shifts, you descend into a steep valley, stone steps, worn and slick with lichen. Above you, carved niches in the rock might have held ceremonial offerings. Alongside the road are shallow ditches used to divert water, primitive but surprisingly effective drainage systems. It's a little like nature's plumbing, but without the helpful hum of modern pipes. You imagine the Chasquis passing here in the misty dark, their torchlight flickering over the stones. Maybe one carries a message from Cusco coded into a series of knots. The emperor will visit, or corn harvest short. Or more mundanely, we're out of dried llama meat, send more snacks. The Inca didn't invent road building, but they perfected it on a scale that left the Spanish stunned. Some roads were so well built they're still in use today, even after centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and tourists in hiking boots. Engineers still marvel at the Incas' knack for switchbacks and retaining walls. Spoiler, they had no iron tools or wheels. The rope bridges, though, those are a whole other level. Spun from ichu grass, they stretched across terrifying chasms, some over 100 feet deep. Every year, villagers would gather to weave a new one, singing as they worked. A ceremony, yes, but also community engineering at its finest. You step tentatively onto one in your imagination, your feet cushioned by braided grass, the whole thing creaking ominously. No pressure. And though there were no wheeled carts, animals like llamas and alpacas helped carry loads, though they were more like fluffy pack donkeys than graceful couriers. No offense to llamas, but they're not exactly the Formula One of cargo transport. Still, you can't help but admire the ambition, the idea that across cliffs, jungle, and desert, people could stay connected. A message from the coast could reach the emperor in just a few days. That's faster than most email support tickets. As the sun begins to dip behind the peaks, painting the mountains in gold and rust, you press on. The road leads upward again toward a place of power, a city of stone that whispers of control, ritual, and a strangely modern obsession with infrastructure. But for now, you pause beside a shallow stream. The water is cold and clear, and nearby wild potatoes grow in stubby clusters, just one of the crops domesticated by these highland dwellers. You nibble an imaginary one, realize it tastes mostly like dirt, and decide maybe you'll wait for lunch. Your legs ache, but your mind is awake. You've walked on roads that stitched a continent together. Stone by stone, tampu by tampu, you've followed in the footsteps of runners who carried a world on their backs, one quipu at a time. You blink against the highland glare as you trudge across a narrow stone bridge spanning a gurgling stream. The wind carries thin wisps of cloud across the sharp edges of the mountains, and somewhere above you a condor wheels in lazy spirals. Beneath your sandals, ancient paths bear the polished sheen of countless feet. Here lies the backbone of the empire's movement, the Capac Yan, or the Great Inca Road. Built across impossible terrain, the Capac Yan stretched over 24,000 miles, connecting the empire from Ecuador to Chile. It's not just a road, it's the circulatory system of the Inca world, and the Chasquis, those nimble messengers we talked about, are its lifeblood. You pass mossy milestones and weathered way stations, imagining the thousands of sandaled feet that once sprinted this same route. Spoiler, most of them were a lot faster than you. The roads themselves weren't all the same. In the highlands, you walk on stone-paved tracks, while in lower elevations or the rainforest, the roads were often beaten earth or even suspended over rivers with rope bridges made of woven grass. One wrong step and, well, let's just say no one's catching your mail today. You arrive at a tampu, a modest structure with low stone walls and a thatched roof. These roadside lodges provided rest and supplies to Chasquis and officials. They're spaced roughly every 10 to 15 miles, about a half-day's run. Inside there's a fire pit still warm, a few clay pots, and a hammock-looking contraption made of alpaca wool rope. You resist the urge to collapse in it, but the smoke-smudged ceiling and faint whiff of dried maize are oddly comforting. Historians still argue whether these tampu were available to the common traveler or strictly reserved for messengers and government officials. Most agree, however, that the entire road system was primarily about control, military, political, and logistical. After all, if you're going to rule the Andes, you'd better be able to move information and troops quickly. As you walk on the landscape shifts, you descend into a steep valley, stone steps, worn and slick with lichen. Above you, carved niches in the rock might have held ceremonial offerings. Alongside the road are shallow ditches used to divert water, primitive but surprisingly effective drainage systems. It's a little like nature's plumbing, but without the helpful hum of modern pipes. You imagine the Chasquis passing here in the misty dark, their torchlight flickering over the stones. Maybe one carries a message from Cusco coded into a series of knots. The emperor will visit, or corn harvest short, or more mundanely, we're out of dried llama meat. Send more snacks. The Inca didn't invent road building, but they perfected it on a scale that left the Spanish stunned. Some roads were so well built, they're still in use today, even after centuries of earthquakes, erosion, and tourists in hiking boots. Engineers still marvel at the Incas' knack for switchbacks and retaining walls. Spoiler, they had no iron tools or wheels. The rope bridges, though, those are a whole other level. Spun from ichu grass, they stretched across terrifying chasms, some over 100 feet deep. Every year, villagers would gather to weave a new one, singing as they worked. A ceremony, yes, but also community engineering at its finest. You step tentatively onto one in your imagination, your feet cushioned by braided grass, the whole thing creaking ominously. No pressure. And though there were no wheeled carts, animals like llamas and alpacas helped carry loads, though they were more like fluffy pack donkeys than graceful couriers. No offense to llamas, but they're not exactly the Formula One of cargo transport. Still, you can't help but admire the ambition, the idea that across cliffs, jungle, and desert people could stay connected. A message from the coast could reach the emperor in just a few days. That's faster than most email support tickets. As the sun begins to dip behind the peaks, painting the mountains in gold and rust, you press on. The road leads upward again toward a place of power, a city of stone that whispers of control, ritual, and a strangely modern obsession with infrastructure. But for now, you pause beside a shallow stream. The water is cold and clear, and nearby wild potatoes grow in stubby clusters, just one of the crops domesticated by these highland dwellers. You nibble an imaginary one, realize it tastes mostly like dirt, and decide maybe you'll wait for lunch. Your legs ache, but your mind is awake. You've walked on roads that stitched a continent together. Stone by stone, tampu by tampu, you followed in the footsteps of runners who carried a world on their backs, one quipu at a time. You keep walking the path, narrowing as the terrain rises. The air thins, but the view widens up here on the high ridges of the Andes. It feels like the sky is only a few feet above your head. The clouds drift slowly beneath your feet, and the earth stretches in craggy lines as far as your eyes can reach. It's along this altitude-defying stretch of road that you come upon a tambo, a modest structure made from stone and mud brick. These were the resting stations of the Chasquis, the relay runners of the empire. You step inside the cool shadows of the tambo and imagine how many tired feet have paused here, how many messengers tucked away for a moment to catch their breath, water their llamas, or warm their hands by a small clay stove. These tambos weren't just pit stops, they were miniature hubs of state. Some were stocked with dried corn jerky blankets and even spare sandals. Others doubled as record-keeping posts where Inca officials tallied census numbers and grain supplies using something that looks at first glance like colorful spaghetti, the quipu. Long cords with dozens of smaller strings hanging off each one tied with delicate knots. Some tight, others loose, some grouped by color. Quipus were a kind of portable data drive for the empire, encoding everything from taxes to battle reports. You picture yourself cross-legged in the corner, a tired Chasquis with sunburnt cheeks, carefully unrolling a bundle of knotted threads. Your message is still intact. No coffee break, no phone charger, just one night's rest and tomorrow's trail, waiting just beyond the tambo walls. Historians still argue whether quipus truly functioned as full-fledged writing systems, or were more like elaborate abacuses. Either way, they carried meaning, and meaning in this empire could move faster than a galloping horse. You rise with the sun and step back onto the road now, winding through steeper, wind-swept switchbacks. The air is cooler here, crisper, and it hums with quiet anticipation. Around a bend you pause. The trail ends abruptly, and ahead, suspended between two cliff faces, is one of the empire's most astonishing creations, a hanging bridge. Made from woven grass, these suspension bridges, known as queswachuca, dangle over gorges so deep the river below looks like a single silver thread. You hesitate. There's no handrail, just a swaying deck of tightly braided ichu grass, anchored by massive stone posts on either side. If you squint, you can see faint signs of wear, tiny phrased darker patches from the tread of countless feet. And yet, it holds. It's held for centuries. You step forward carefully, placing your foot on the bridge's soft sway. It bounces slightly under your weight as if testing your confidence. Each step is deliberate, guided by faith in the engineers who built this and the communities who maintain it, often with annual ceremonies involving singing, fasting, and a lot of yelling about knots. Halfway across, the wind whistles louder and the bridge rocks like a cradle. It's terrifying and beautiful. Beneath you, the churning river has no idea how many messengers passed above it, barefoot and fearless. You wonder how many songs and warnings and market numbers flew across this chasm, one breath at a time. Crossing a Chasquis is a ritual, and like many rituals, it says something about the trust you place in others, about the delicate balance of empire, and about the strange power of grass when you twist it together the right way. Some scholars believe these bridges were guarded or even ceremonially blessed before major campaigns. Others think their role was mostly practical. Either way, the message is clear: where there's no path, the Inca made one. You've barely caught your breath from the mountain crossings, but now you find yourself approaching one of the Inca Empire's most overlooked feats, the Tambo way stations. Picture this: you're jogging along a dusty stretch of the Capac Yang, when rising ahead like a mirage appears a small stone structure with a thatched roof and low walls shaped to block the wind. Congratulations, you've made it to a Tambo, one of the empire's resting posts for weary Chasquis and official travelers. You slow your pace and take in the surroundings. The Tambo is modest yet perfectly functional. Inside, woven reed mats are laid on hard-packed earthen floors. There's a clay jug of chicha, slightly fermented maize beer, waiting for you. Someone's left behind a small bundle of coca leaves as a welcoming gesture. These places weren't five-star resorts, but for runners doing 60 miles a day at high elevation, a tambo was a slice of paradise. Tambos were spaced with near-military precision. Some were just a few miles apart in rugged terrain, while others stretched out farther where the land was flatter. Historians still argue whether these spacing decisions were made solely based on geography or if they also followed some sacred or administrative pattern. Either way, the level of forethought is mind-numbing, and we haven't even touched the logistics. The Inca state made sure these posts were stocked not by imperial decree alone, but through the mita labor system. Locals in the nearby Alus, those kin-based community units, were assigned rotating duties to keep the tambos running. One week you might be farming quinoa, and the next you're shuttling smoked llama meat and maize cakes up a mountain to restock a way station. It's like community service, but with more llamas and fewer orange vests. Each tambo was part dormitory, part pantry, and part message hub. If you were a Chasquis, you didn't just crash here. You also exchanged news, updated knot records, and possibly even picked up orders for the next leg of your run. They weren't glamorous, but they were reliable, consistent, and most crucially safe. You didn't have to guess where to stop or wonder if you'd find food or shelter. That predictability allowed the system to hum with eerie efficiency. By now, your calves are screaming for mercy, so you sit down under the eaves of the tambo and nibble on some dried chuño, freeze-dried potatoes that look like little gray pebbles but pack a powerful starchy punch. It's not exactly fine dining, but you're grateful for anything that doesn't involve chewing more coca leaves. An interesting little tangent here: some tambos were massive, near-palatial complexes used for housing nobles or even the Sapa Inca during state tours. These were more than just motels. They were political statements carved in stone, showing off imperial control and hospitality. And yes, they likely had better snacks. You rest a bit longer, watching a llama shuffle past with what you suspect is a look of judgment. The highland air is thin but crisp, and the sun, when it breaks through the clouds, glints off the distant snowcaps in a way that makes you forget the ache in your knees. And just when you think you've mastered the system, you hear footsteps. Another Chasquis arrives from the opposite direction, panting knot bundle in hand. The two of you exchange quick nods, no need for words, and he's off again, barely pausing before disappearing around the next bend. It's a fleeting, silent brotherhood of runners bound by mission terrain and sore arches. Now you adjust the woven bag across your shoulder and get ready to leave. You check the bundle of quipus you've been entrusted with, mentally rehearsing the coded message. You're not just carrying strings, you're carrying imperial will. And this Tombo, it's one dot in a vast breathing organism of stone sweat and symmetry. You step back onto the trail, thinking not for the first time that the real genius of the Inca Empire might not be its gold or architecture, but its ability to knit together this sprawling, mountain-wrapped realm through simple, reliable human motion. No wheels, no horses, no roads as we'd define them. Just legs, lungs, and a network of tambos that never let you down. You ease back into the trail, the tambo shrinking behind you as the wind picks up along the ridge. As you press onward, the terrain shifts again. Rolling foothills melt into higher altitude valleys where the scenery becomes sparser, but somehow more majestic. It's here in the open silence that the full scale of the Inca communication network starts to hit you. You're not walking random trails. You're inside a system, a real one. Not a poetic metaphor, not some historical footnote. A living, breathing, carefully orchestrated operation engineered with such precision that it makes your modern group chat look like chaos. Here's where it gets technical, but in a cozy bedtime kind of way. The Capac Ñan wasn't just a single highway. It was an entire matrix of roads, arteries, and capillaries that stretched over 24,000 miles. That's basically the circumference of the Earth, if you flattened it and made it walkable. The main trunk ran north to south, connecting Quito to Cusco and then to what's now Chile and Argentina. But then came the branches, highland routes, jungle side paths, desert shortcuts, each maintained and monitored with near fanatical consistency. Now you might assume these roads were built like Roman roads, wide, flat, made for wheels. But the Incas weren't interested in chariots. Nope, no wheels. Everything was designed for foot traffic llamas, and a shockingly small number of options for sitting down. The stones were often uneven and steep, almost rude in how little they cared about comfort. But they lasted. They still do. And yet, what really blows your sleepy little mind is how the system ran without written language. No ink, no scrolls, not even casual post-its. Instead, they had quipus bundles of cords with knots tied in strategic positions. Some knots represented numbers, others represented categories or items. Colors mattered too. A yellow strand might mean corn, while a red one meant warriors. Combined, they could convey data census information, inventories, tribute records, and even possibly abstract ideas. Historians still argue whether quipus were just data logs or if they functioned as a form of full written language. Either way, it was a complex tactile filing system you wore across your chest. Move over iCloud. Of course, this makes you wonder who understood all this. The answer, the Quipucamayaks, say that 5 times fast. These were specially trained experts who could read Thai and decode quipus with wizard-like fluency. Think of them as state librarians, accountants, and archivists, all rolled into one, but with more calluses on their fingers. Every community had at least one, and the empire ensured these experts passed down their skills through apprenticeships. Forget SATs. This was the real standardized testing. Some Quipucamayaks also worked in tandem with the Chasquis, traveling along certain circuits to update records or deliver fiscal information. They weren't messengers themselves, but without them, the system would have unraveled into a spaghetti pile of confusion. Imagine one misplaced knot, and suddenly someone thinks they're getting 500 llamas instead of 5, which would be hilarious until your village can't breathe under a tidal wave of wool. And here's a quirky bit: researchers have discovered that some quipus use different types of string materials llama wool for common records, cotton for royal affairs. It's like using gold stationery to send the emperor a grocery list. Priorities. Now, as you move steadily along this mountain path, you picture thousands of runners doing what you're doing across centuries. Human emails with legs. But unlike modern texts, these messages weren't instantly replaceable. Lose a quip. That was the equivalent of deleting your only copy of the national budget. No pressure. You spot a fork in the trail ahead, where a signpost carved into stone points toward different provinces. You follow the route etched with a simple zigzag, a symbol known to mark official royal roads, the stones worn smooth by centuries of touch. Here's where the whisper of history becomes a real sensation. You're not just imagining it anymore, you're standing where millions have stood, walked, run, and rested. And then, just to throw your thoughts into another delightful rabbit hole, you remember that the entire system ran without a single written map. No GPS, no atlases, not even a helpful "You are here" plaque. Everything was memorized routes, waypoints, distances, handed down orally or learned on foot. That's right. They ran these trails blind but not lost. One scholarly debate still floats around today. How did they manage quality control across such a sprawling infrastructure? Some argue there was a dedicated class of road inspectors, while others suggest the local a labor system had built-in checks. Either way, the roads didn't just survive, they thrived. Even centuries later, hikers and archaeologists stumble on sections of Inca trails still intact, as if waiting for the next runner to arrive. You find a flat rock and sit for a moment, catching your breath. The quipus slung over your shoulder brushes against your side. You run your fingers over the knots, wondering what messages they hold. Tribute tallies, wedding invitations, imperial gossip, maybe all three. In that moment, the silence of the mountains feels less empty and more like a library, one where the shelves are trails and the books are carried, not bound. You rise again, adjusting your sandals, and head toward the next curve in the road, where the world dips behind a stone ridge and history continues unfolding one footstep at a time. The wind shifts again as you round a bend, and now the trail slants downhill, revealing a patchwork of valley farms below fields, etched into the landscape like delicate embroidery. The air is drier here, sun-warmed and carrying that earthy scent of dust llamas and distant smoke from cooking fires. As you descend, you pass an old retaining wall made of impossibly tight-fitted stones. There's no mortar, no glue, just geometry and stubborn patience. You pause to run your fingers along the cool surface, marveling at how even time hasn't dared to pull it apart. At this altitude, you're close to one of the Inca Empire's heartbeats, an administrative hub where messages from all directions once converged. Think of it as an ancient call center, except everyone was outdoors, very fit, and spoke Quechua. You're approaching a central relay point, one of those rare places where Chasquis handed off not just messages, but perhaps gossip, political tension, or even coded rebellion. These spots weren't random. They were built for efficiency, good elevation, visibility, food stores, water nearby, a kind of logistical dream camp. You arrive just as a shepherd and his flock pass by the soft bleats of the animals mingling with the breeze. No Incan relay workers today, just a lonely bird watching you from a jagged outcrop. But if you squint hard enough, you can almost see them runners swapping out sandals, passing on quipus, exchanging brief nods and running off in opposite directions like the world's most solemn relay race. The Inca didn't believe in delay. Every relay point, called a Chasquis, was a marvel of timing. Messengers would run a fixed route, hand off their cargo, then rest. The next Chasquis would already be primed and waiting. There was no time to browse memes or check in with mom. Just run, deliver, repeat. The system was so efficient that messages could travel over 200 miles in a single day, which honestly puts your morning inbox refreshed to shame. And here's the truly delightful tidbit. Some historians believe each relay house had musical horns or conch shells used to alert the next Chasquis to get ready. Basically, air horns Inca edition. Not quite the office PA system, but close. Picture a sleepy guy rubbing his eyes at dawn, then suddenly jolted awake by a thunderous "Blate" echoing through the mountains. Time to run. The messages weren't always imperial commands or inventory counts, though. Some were deeply personal. News of a family member's illness, a wedding announcement, maybe even a cheeky poem. The Incas didn't waste a system this elegant on just bureaucracy. Some quipus have been found with unusual knot patterns that don't align with known accounting categories. Historians still argue whether these might be the remnants of love letters, prayers, or private jokes, meaning the ancient Peruvian equivalent of emojis might have involved tiny clusters of tightly wound knots. By the time you reach the bottom of the slope, your legs are trembling slightly, but your mind feels wired, like you're holding on to something ancient and electric. You pass a stone pillar that once marked a jurisdictional boundary, separating different provinces called suyus. These administrative divisions were part of a larger system known as Tawantinsuyu, literally the four parts together. This wasn't just geography, it was ideology. Every suyu had its own mini-government road team, tax collectors, and of course, its own Chasquis circuit. The relay stations within each suyu were run with the same obsessive order you've come to expect. Food was rationed, water collected in clay cisterns, sandals repaired, and runners trained. It wasn't unusual for messengers to be recruited young, quick-footed kids from local villages chosen for their stamina and memory. Because that's the kicker, Chasquis didn't just carry messages in chords. They often had to recite the message, orally, word for word, especially when speaking to someone who couldn't read quipus. So picture this, a 17-year-old sprinting up a mountain slope with a knotted string in one hand and in their head, a memorized speech that includes royal titles, population stats, grain shipments, and maybe a polite threat or two from the emperor, and you think your job's stressful. There are stories still floating in the oral traditions of Andean communities about legendary Chasquis who could cover 25 miles in a single shift. Some say they could run faster than a galloping horse, which sounds implausible until you realize that horses didn't arrive in South America until the Spanish showed up in the 1500s. Before then, the fastest thing on two legs was a determined teenager with lungs of steel and absolutely zero chill. And while we're here, let's talk altitude. Most Chasquis ran routes between 8,000 and 14,000 feet above sea level. That's the kind of height that makes your ears pop and your brain start composing dramatic goodbye notes. But not for these guys. Their lungs adapted, their legs grew like tree trunks, and their blood oxygen levels were something that would make modern athletes weep with jealousy. There's one particular relay station now, just a moss-covered ruin where archaeologists found over a dozen discarded sandals made of woven reeds. That's right, there's a small corner of the Andes that's essentially a historical lost and found for ancient footwear. Some still had intact toe straps. Others looked like they were tossed aside in a hurry, as if the Chasquis just couldn't wait to get out of them. Because running 20 miles in sandals, yeah, you're going to want to take those off as soon as humanly possible. You leave the relay station behind and move further into the valley, where shadows stretch long and the wind hushes down like a librarian. The sky dims a bit, casting the land in softer light, and you start to feel that pleasant kind of tired, the kind that says, yes, I've earned that sleep tonight. But don't nod off just yet. We've still got messengers to meet, mountains to cross, and a few more secrets tied tightly into the cords of history. You follow a worn path along the edge of a narrow terrace, where the mountains begin to hem you in once more like towering guardians holding back the sky. There's a slight chill in the air now, the kind that sneaks under your collar, and makes you appreciate every sunbeam that finds its way through the clouds. The altitude climbs again, not sharply, but enough to tighten your breath a little, reminding you that you're back in the highland zone where Chasquis truly earned their reputations. As you approach another Chasquis, this one partly reclaimed by moss and wiry grass, you notice something peculiar, a series of carved symbols on the stone lintel above the entrance. They're not letters exactly, more like notches or grooves. Historians still argue whether these marks were purely decorative or if they had something to do with root code schedules or sacred numerology. In the absence of a written alphabet, the Inca world was a masterclass in semiotics. Everything carried meaning, often more than one. Inside the relay shelter is quiet. You imagine the bustle it once held Chasquis, arriving out of breath, wiping sweat with woolen sleeves, gulping water from clay jars. In one corner, a clay pot still holds the faint scent of dried maize. Maybe this one belonged to a younger messenger who always left a snack behind, hoping it'd still be there for his return trip. There's something tender in that thought, proof that even in the engine of an empire, someone still had a favorite lunch spot. Beyond the shelter, a steep zigzag of stairs climbs sharply toward a ridge. You begin the ascent, each step carved precisely into the rock face, following the ancient rhythm of travel. The Inca built with intention. This wasn't just a staircase, it was infrastructure disguised as endurance training. And now you're walking it too. Every step creaks in your knees, but the view expands behind you, with each landing valleys curling like ribbons, distant snowcaps glowing pale in the sun, and the thread-like trails of other messengers crisscrossing invisible in the landscape. There's a story passed down among Andean communities about a Chasquis who refused to hand off his message because the next runner was late. Instead of waiting, he just kept going mile after mile, relay point after relay point. He supposedly ran over 100 miles in 2 days, fueled by pride, coca leaves, and probably a healthy grudge. Is it true? Hard to say. But every empire needs its legends, and this one fits like a well-worn sandal. Speaking of fuel, the Inca had no coffee shops or protein bars, but they did have coca chewed for stamina, altitude resistance, and a bit of alertness. Don't get too excited. This wasn't a wild party drug. It was a sacred leaf used sparingly and with ritual. Still, modern studies have shown that coca chewing does help with oxygen absorption and fatigue, so Inca science wins again. It's the original performance-enhancing substance minus the lab coat and side effects. The stairs finally level off, and you find yourself standing on a natural plateau overlooking a ravine. It's quiet, save for the wind and the occasional cry of a condor overhead. This was a natural checkpoint, a visual line of sight where messages could be signaled in emergencies using smoke or mirrored sunlight on polished metal discs. The Inca may not have had radios, but they weren't lacking in creative workarounds. Historians still debate whether some signals were color-coded, or if messengers carried standard signal kits with them. You squat beside a small cairn of stones, likely an old waymarker, and dig your fingers into the dry soil. Beneath you find a flat pebble smoothed by time and painted with faint traces of red pigment. Was it once part of a ceremonial offering, a child's toy left behind, a simple marker to say yes? Someone passed this way. The past doesn't always answer. Sometimes it just hands you a stone and says, make of this what you will. Further down the plateau, a split in the road leads to an ancient tampu, a larger outpost for state use. Unlike the smaller Chasquis, tampu toko were designed for rest resupply and sometimes housing traveling officials. The Inca knew that even their messengers needed more than speed. They needed places to sleep, recover, and send reports. Some tampus were luxurious by local standards, soft llama wool bedding, hot food, perhaps even a local storyteller spinning tales while the runners rested aching feet by the fire. You duck inside one of the ruins where the shadows pool deep and cool. Here, messages would have been read aloud to keepers or visiting administrators. Quipus unrolled gently on stone tables, their knots interpreted by trained readers, often men called quipukamayaks. These weren't simple record keepers. They were part accountant, part storyteller, part data analyst. Historians still argue whether the training to read quipus required a formal apprenticeship or was passed informally within families. Either way, it wasn't a casual hobby. You didn't just pick up a few knots over the weekend. The quipukamayaks could read messages, but some may have also created backup versions. Think of it as a 15th century backup drive made of string. If one runner lost the cord, another had the duplicate. Redundancy wasn't just smart, it was sacred. The Inca viewed communication as an extension of cosmic order. Interruption, weren't just administrative annoyances, they were spiritual disruptions. And here's a quirky tidbit. One Quipucamayak near Cusco reportedly kept a calendar quipu that also tracked lunar cycles and ritual festivals. Think planner plus astrological chart plus tax form all in one. And you thought your bullet journal was doing the most. As you leave the Tampu and look west, the light begins to shift again, longer shadows, gentler contrast. You feel a new kind of stillness now, one born from rhythm and routine. The path dips again into forested hillside, where ferns crowd the stones and tree trunks shimmer with lichens. It's cooler here, sheltered. You press on, imagining what it felt like to carry someone's words this far day after day with only your heartbeat and your breath to keep you company. There's something oddly comforting about it. No phones, no inbox, no notifications, just the clarity of purpose, the trust of a system built on human legs and silent trust. And as you wind through the trees, your footsteps echo those taken hundreds of years ago, by people who ran not for fame but for the thread that held their world together. You descend a narrow slope now, where stone steps yield to packed earth and moss-covered roots. The canopy overhead thickens, casting dappled patterns on the trail below, cool and green like a living tunnel. It's here that the rhythm of the journey shifts again, from the open echoing heights to the soft hush of the forest. This stretch of the road feels different. It's less formal, more organic. And it reminds you that not all of the Inca road network was built to impress. Some of it, like this stretch, was simply practical, quiet, worn by foot, not ceremony. You pass a weathered stone pillar tucked into the slope, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it. A boundary marker. These were scattered across the empire, discreet, often unadorned, but absolutely essential. They divided not only geography but responsibility. One region's runners handed off to another's. Messages crossed invisible borders. And in a world where everything from taxes to potatoes was counted and catalogued, knowing exactly where you were mattered a great deal. Historians still argue whether some of these markers had spiritual significance or were purely bureaucratic. Likely both, because in the Inca mindset, the divine and the mundane were rarely far apart. As you walk, the forest offers its own soundtrack. Distant bird song, the click of insects, the occasional rustle of something moving just out of sight. You start to imagine what it must have been like to run this route at dusk, or worse, in heavy rain. No streetlights, no clear signage, just the weight of the quipu in your bag and the surety of your training. The road was a teacher, every turn memorized, every dip and climb stored in muscle memory. You step around a fallen tree and catch a glint of water through the brush, a small stream, its surface broken by speckled light. Chasquis often relied on these natural waypoints. They knew which ones were clean, which ones were coldest, which ones were sacred. A drink here, if you're brave enough to kneel, is icy and refreshing, though you silently thank modern plumbing. Still, there's something beautiful about the idea that an entire communication network functioned without a single faucet. Just rivers, snowmelt gourds, and trust. At a bend in the trail, you spot something unexpected. A cluster of carved stones forming what looks like a bench sheltered by a half-circle of low, stacked rock. A rest stop, a shrine, maybe both. One theory suggests that some of these quiet spots were used for offering stones, arranged in sacred shapes, coca leaves scattered as tribute to the apus, or mountain spirits. Another proposes they were meeting points, relay stations without structures for quick handoffs between runners who didn't need a roof, just a marker and a breath. Historians still debate how widespread this kind of informal infrastructure was, but what's certain is that no part of the Inca system was accidental. Even the simplest seat in the forest probably had a purpose. You sit for a moment. The moss is damp, the air cool. Your legs hum with fatigue even though you're not actually delivering anything. Funny how the mind joins the body in these little illusions. You're only pretending to be a Chasquis, but the empathy feels real, like muscle memory handed down through storytelling. And while your modern shoes probably beat rawhide sandals, there's a part of you that admires the sheer grit it must have taken to do this for real, every day, across impossible distances, with nothing but a sliver of string and a job to do. Up ahead, the path curves toward a bridge, not a grand suspension affair, but one of those rope and stick marvels the Inca perfected. Yes, the famous grass bridges really existed. Woven from dried ichu grass and anchored by stone supports, they could stretch over canyons, rivers, and terrifying drops. Each year, communities would come together to rebuild them. It wasn't just engineering, it was ceremony, celebration, a reaffirmation of unity. And guess who ran across them daily? That's right, our exhausted, nimble-footed Chasquis. You test the current bridge with a hesitant step. It creaks, sure, but it holds. You grip the woven handrails and inch forward. Below, the river chatters over rocks like it has secrets. Your foot slips slightly and your heart jumps, but you steady yourself. These bridges have supported thousands. They've danced in the wind and endured storms. They know their purpose. So do you, even if you're only imagining it. On the other side, the trail widens briefly. A scatter of red berries dots the ground, probably bird food now, but maybe once picked and chewed for energy by messengers on the go. You imagine someone pausing here, leaning against a tree, debating whether to eat or save the berries for later. The stomach growls louder on the road, and there's no vending machine tucked behind a waterfall. The Inca runner lived by instinct, stamina, and an uncanny knowledge of the landscape. And then you spot it just off the trail behind a cluster of ferns, a quipus tucked into a small niche in the rocks. Not a real one, of course, but you like to think it could have been. Maybe someone hid it here in a rush. Maybe they meant to return. Maybe it was a backup or a decoy. One story tells of a Chasquis who buried his message when enemy scouts were near returning days later to retrieve it. Whether it's true or not, the image lingers, the corded message tucked in nature's vault, waiting patiently like memory itself. As the light filters through the leaves in long golden slants, you feel the pace of everything slow. The forest seems to breathe around you like it remembers the footsteps of runners long gone. The trail becomes softer, the sounds gentler. You are in a liminal space now, not quite destination, not quite wilderness. A thread between worlds, just like the messages once carried here. And still, the path pulls you forward. The path narrows once again, but now it's lined with low walls of fitted stone, their surfaces slick with lichen and time. You're entering a zone where the landscape subtly transforms, more manicured, more intentional. You're nearing a tambo, one of the many relay lodges that punctuated the Inca road system, like quiet commas in a long, determined sentence. These tambos weren't exactly hotels, but they weren't primitive lean-tos either. Think rest stops for state-sponsored joggers, equipped with shelter, food, water, and occasionally even a fresh runner waiting in the wings. This one is mostly ruined now, just the skeletal suggestion of rectangular outlines, a few stone storage nooks tucked into the earth, and a flattened courtyard. Still, in your imagination, the place is alive. You hear the scrape of sandals against stone, the creak of a wooden door, the hushed exchange of news. A noble's death, a change in weather, a whispered warning about rebellion stirring on the horizon. It's easy to picture a Chasquis arriving here, sweat-slicked, winded, but focused. He hands off the quipus, drinks deep from a cold ceramic vessel, maybe chews a wad of coca leaves before darting off again. There's no lingering, no scrolling through messages. His entire world is made of urgency and trust. Historians still argue whether tombos were spaced primarily for the runner's endurance or based on topography and political control, probably both. The Inca weren't sentimental about infrastructure, everything had purpose. You walk through what was once a storeroom, your footsteps muffled by centuries of dust. Here dried meats, maize and charqui. Yes, the original jerky were stacked in layers. No fridges, of course, just cool, dry air and salt. It sounds primitive, but it worked. And you have to admit, even dehydrated llama meat has a certain rustic appeal when you've just jogged 50 kilometers up a mountain. In a corner, you spot a faint mural, just a sunburst, its rays flaking its outline, simple but confident. The Inca revered Inti, the sun god, and you imagine this little painting as a kind of watchful eye. Not every tombo had such art, but those that did likely held higher status or served special routes. There's even a fringe theory that some tombos doubled as ceremonial rest points for elite messengers carrying divine pronouncements. Far-fetched maybe, but it does give your walk a slight air of gravitas. After all, you're clearly chosen by the sun. Outside, a stone bench looks out over the valley. You sit there a moment the way a Chasquis might have, stretching sore calves and scanning the horizon for the next ridge. Below, terraces still claw at the hillsides, in rows of green geometry, proof that someone lived and farmed here, fed runners here, maybe even watched them pass with quiet awe. You imagine one of the locals, a farmer, perhaps leaning on a hoe, wondering what news flew across the empire today. A good harvest in the south, a new bridge collapsing in the north, an emperor sneezing. When your entire information system runs on foot, even minor updates feel weighty. And yes, they had redundancy. Important messages were sent in duplicate, sometimes triplicate, in case a runner dropped dead or got sidetracked by, say, a landslide or a mountain cat. And you thought your inbox was stressful. As you stand, the wind carries the faintest scent of smoke someone somewhere is cooking. Probably tubers, maybe guinea pig. If you were a real Chasquis, you'd barely register the smell, but since you're only sleepwalking through history, it makes your stomach growl. A reminder that while this job was noble, it wasn't glamorous. The runners didn't get medals, no laurels, just a meal and maybe a nod. You begin descending again. The terrain is smoother now, the trail more well-worn. It's a sign you're nearing a hub, a city, a provincial center. Possibly the Inca system revolved around Cusco, the navel of the empire, but its arms stretched across the Andes in all directions to places like Quito, Arequipa, and the edge of the Amazon. No part was untouched. Messages passed through mountain passes, jungle fringes, desert stretches. And here you are, tracing one of those ancient veins. You notice the pace of your imaginary run has slowed, not from exhaustion, but from reflection. This road, this system, it wasn't just logistics. It was culture, discipline. It was the IncaEmpire's heartbeat, pulsing messages across impossible terrain, binding communities like ligaments in a body. Without the Chasquis, without the tambos, without the roads carved into stone and memory, the empire might have unraveled far sooner. And here's a weird little tidbit: the Inca never invented the wheel for transport. No carts, no wagons, no horses. Everything moved on foot or on the backs of llamas. It wasn't a failure of imagination. It just didn't suit their environment. Try dragging a cart over a rope bridge and see how far you get. So instead, they invested in people. Legs, stamina, memory, and those people, those Chasquis, became walking USB drives faster than you'd expect, and just as vital. The trail leads you to an overlook where the stone road splits. One route dips down toward the coast, the other snakes up into the cloud-shrouded peaks. You pause, as if choosing a direction, though you know you'll follow the higher path. The coast can wait. For now, you're still chasing altitude, still tracing the backbone of the empire. And as twilight settles, the stone path begins to glow softly in the fading light, as if, even after centuries, it remembers the feet that once flew across it, carrying words, warnings, and whispers through an empire held together by thread and resolve. The light thins further, fading to that particular kind of dusk where the sky glows, but the earth sinks into deep shadow. You find yourself at the crest of a high pass, the air thinner now, but still somehow calm. It's here that the road does something bold. It curves not in a lazy arc, but in a deliberate flourish, like a calligrapher's flick at the end of a line. Ahead lies a sacred milestone, a final waypoint in the Chasquis' journey. This wasn't just a message drop-off. This was where the most urgent, most delicate, most imperial messages were delivered directly to those with enough power to act on them. You're standing at a convergence point, a nexus of runners of politics, of whispered commands, passed with barely a breath. From here, the news traveled not on foot, but in decisions. Stone pillars once marked this place, but most are toppled now, buried in moss, or leaning like tired elders. You press a hand against one, feeling the grooves, where hands like yours once braced themselves before making their final sprint. That groove right there may be worn by the same fingers that delivered the order to mobilize against the rebellious Inca, or carried a condolence message from the Sapa Inca to a grieving general. You'll never know. That's the strange intimacy of the Inca postal system. It was precise, trusted, and entirely ephemeral. No archives, just voices, legs, memory. You turn slowly, taking in the panorama. Below you, terraced fields stretch like patchwork, and the ink-dark lines of the road disappear into cloud and forest. This was the true genius of the Inca system. It didn't just cross great distances, it crossed cultures, languages, climates. It stitched together desert dwellers and mountain folk and jungle traders under one logistics plan so ambitious it makes modern postal systems look a little cozy. And yet the system wasn't invincible. With the arrival of the Spanish, the Chasquis found themselves outrun not by faster messengers, but by guns, germs, and horses. Within decades, the whole network frayed. The tambos emptied. The rope bridges collapsed. The quipus, once humming with encoded data, were misunderstood, mishandled, or destroyed. Historians still argue whether the Spanish ever truly understood what they dismantled, or whether they just stomped on it because it looked indigenous. Either way, the silence left behind was deafening. Even today, quipus remain partially undeciphered. Some think we're close to cracking their code, maybe a mix of binary logic and narrative knots. Others argue we've missed the key entirely. It's possible the Inca encoded not just numbers, but metaphors, genealogy, and entire philosophies into their chords. Imagine that a postal system that also carried poetry. And yes, there are tales, probably apocryphal, of lone Chasquis who kept running long after the empire fell, delivering news to no one, or believing, perhaps, that the Inca would return. The Andean people didn't forget the roads. Some were repurposed for colonial trade, others became footpaths for shepherds or smugglers, and a few, like the one you're standing on now, survive as ghostly remnants, still walked, still worn, still echoing with the quiet urgency of old footsteps. You sit down on a boulder, legs dangling over the edge of a slope that drops into a sea of cloud. The wind carries with it the scent of moss and memory. A tiny carved stone, a wayfinder, a good luck token, rests half buried near your foot. You pick it up And imagine a Chasquis doing the same 500 years ago. Did he toss it into a stream for luck, or carry it all the way from Cusco, a quiet act of devotion to the sun god? This wasn't just a mail system, it was an artery. It pulsed with the Inca worldview, order, control, communication, obedience, and the wild challenge of their landscape. The Chasquis didn't just run messages, they sustained the empire's very metabolism. Without them, there were no decisions, no enforcement, no presence, and like blood flowing away from a stopped heart, the empire's collapse was silent, sudden, and total. But here's the sleepy part, because you've made it. You've followed the Chasquis from step 1 to step none, through mountain passes, through tambos, and cloud forests, from quipus to silence. You've trod the road built with no wheel, carried the memory of an empire that communicated without paper, and wandered a system that died without leaving a trace of its noise. And now, as you lie back, cool stone against your spine, the stars blink on one by one, like the lights of distant tambos relighting in the night. The old runners are long gone, but the road still waits, still dreams, still remembers. The stars above you seem impossibly steady, old quiet companions, in a world that's always moving. The wind sighs softly over the pass, stirring the grasses in slow ripples like breathing. In this moment, everything feels slower, gentler. The urgency of the Chasquis' run fades and indicates into a calm rhythm, like the soft pulse of a sleeping earth beneath your back. You let your body settle, as if molded by the same stones that held up so many souls before yours. The silence isn't empty here, it's full of things that once mattered deeply, now softened by time. The footsteps of messengers, the whispers of wind between tambos, the murmur of chords brushing together on a quipus someone once understood completely. All those moments, all those words carried across the Andes now return to the stillness. They fold themselves into the dark soil and wait quiet, undemanding, patient. Like sleep itself. So just rest now. Let go of the climb, the story, even the names. Let the echoes of empire curl like mist around your thoughts. Let them drift. Let them fade. Let them dream. Because tonight you've walked far enough. No more steps, no more messages, only stillness, only peace, only sleep.